Hello, this is Emma. I'm standing here right next to the Minneapolis 3rd Precinct at Lake in Minnehaha. You can see the Minnehaha liquor store right over there. Since I'm in the area and I know a lot of people have asked what things look like over here now, I thought I'd just walk through. So that's the precinct right here. Quite a few times when I was down here, when the protests were happening, there were police lines right here or right here, and a crowd of people right there yelling at the police or just staring at them and things like that. The first time I came down here, there was the head of a pig on the pavement right over there. Some of these barricades were already here at that time, but this building did have fires set inside, but obviously it did not burn down. But you can see inside that one open window, there's smoke damage on the walls and lots of broken windows. Back here in the parking lot is where they had a lot of their squad cars, and there were lots of police back here every time I came over by that entrance. And like I said, right over here, I'll take you around to look at the front. So a lot of the graffiti has been painted over and covered up. There's actually still some on this building. It's really strange to be over here with no police presence. There were so many on top of the building in every direction, staring at everybody. But see this concrete barricade? It's all kind of one color. They spray painted it to cover up all of the graffiti that was here. And I noticed that a lot of the street lights and signs around here are sprayed with that same color. They just sprayed over everything to cover everything up. Those big blocks are at the entrance of the Minneapolis 3rd Precinct. They might look familiar to you if you've seen any of the photos or footage of protests from the Minneapolis downtown precinct that currently has a wall built around it that covers up the sidewalk with those same big concrete blocks. You can see the fire damage at the top there. All the windows are covered up with metal now all the way down. There was a bus stop right here, a bus shelter that they took away. So I'll just walk up and down Lake so you can see what everything looks like now. Here's one of those poles. Like I said, these concrete barricades were just painted over, just sprayed. So is this. It's supposed to be green, but they just went through here and covered up all of the graffiti with that beige colored paint. Go this way. So that's Target. There's a Juneteenth event happening in the parking lot right now. But that is the Target that was looted, the Cub back there also, and a couple of other smaller shops. So you're probably familiar with that. More spots where it looks like they painted over the instructions for the walk buttons. And I don't know if they scraped it off or if someone else did, but all the graffiti is off of the Target sign. They painted over that. Here's the AutoZone. The sign is still standing, even after everything that happened to it. Like, it was a little bit... Things happened kind of every night and every day that changed the state of the AutoZone. But the sign has remained largely untouched. It's kind of funny that the sign is still up there with the building knocked down now. So right where that curb is right there is the sidewalk that was right in front of the AutoZone, so the building was right there. I'll go back there, but on the other side of it was the Wendy's and a couple of other things that burned. I will circle back after I go to some of the other places and then end up over there. There's the Minnehaha liquor store. Again, this is the corner of Minnehaha and Lake Street in South Minneapolis. That is the Minneapolis 3rd Precinct building that was overtaken. The police left. The people out here went inside, set fires inside, set fires out front. Obviously, the building did not burn down. And after I walk down this side of the street, I'll go on the other side and get closer to the liquor store and the tobacco store. I was not out here when the liquor store was burning, but I was out here when the tobacco store, that was where the fire had started. It was pitch black because there were no street lights on at the time, and a small fire inside, and then things started exploding, and the fire very quickly got a lot bigger. And that was about the same time when the fires were started at the precinct also. This is the Coliseum building. On the corner here, it was vacant. It used to be a Denny's, but it was empty. There's a Hennepin County Clinic, the East Lake Clinic is right there. I used to take my kids there sometimes. Some of the windows were broken, but when the AutoZone was on fire, police were guarding that pretty well. But the night that the precinct and Minnehaha liquors burned, some of this building did too. You can see the building is all black. The windows are totally black. But there are newer paintings on the walls, or on the plywood here now. And those windows are completely black. They've been boarded up now from the inside. Across the street, another old building. There was a restaurant on the end, a Town Talk diner in the middle. There was a check cashing place on the end. I believe there's a radio station in there, and this was also the building that housed the venue that George Floyd and Derek Chauvin both worked. So when that building burned, some of the walls were still standing. Some of the facade was still up. A lot on this side. The front was up, and a few like supportive walls in the middle, but they've knocked that down. Got a Pikachu there. That building is the Hennepin County Library. The first few times that I had been down here, when there were a bunch of broken windows, things had been looted, stuff like that, no one had broken into the library, and most of the people walking past the library were kind of joking about that a bit. At one point when I did walk by, there was one window that had broken in the library, but that was kind of the extent. I think that I heard that there was a small fire at some point that did get set inside of the library, but it's like there had been a bunch of graffiti there that's all covered up. I believe this building was empty at the time, so just the windows got broken here. This was the pawn shop. This was on fire the same night that the liquor store and the precinct burned, but it was way earlier in the evening. So firefighters were putting this out. I have video of that and photos of it. The street was blocked off here by firefighters, but I don't think that they went in and tackled much else after that. It was interesting to see when the firefighters were here trying to put out this fire, because there were only a couple of police nearby. The area was not well blocked off. People could kind of get like as close as they wanted to the fire. It was not your normal experience with a huge fire like this. There was some concern about the stability of this wall when they were fighting that fire and encouraging people to not go too close to it. And then I noticed that the next couple of days after that, this wall was not blocked off at all. But now it looks like there's some barricades set up to keep people away from it. Cash and Pawn here on Lake Street in South Minneapolis. And I won't go too much farther because most of the stuff that happened from here further east down lake was all like farther spread out. So I don't want to take a boring walk with you guys, but this is US Bank. There was lots of graffiti on US Bank. A few windows were broken. First it started with graffiti, and then one night some windows were broken. And then I believe it was that same night that everything else burned. There was fire in here too. I don't know how far into the building the fire got. But it looks like all of this graffiti is covered up also. There was a building one of the first nights that burned there, but they've now knocked that one down also. Just a couple blocks down that way is where the Walgreens is, that also got looted. I believe one night it got broken into, not too much happened, and then it very much got looted. Everything inside got pretty destroyed from the sprinklers being on, and then it burned one of the following nights, and now they've demolished it, so there's no building there anymore. But they did set up a mobile pharmacy for anyone that was concerned about people who need that. Walgreens for medicine or whatever, there's like a shipping container in the parking lot now that they are calling a mobile pharmacy. So the community is still being served in that way. So I will cross the streets and get closer to the other stuff on the other side of the street, and then I'll go back behind the AutoZone and show you guys where the Wendy's was and a couple of things that are over there. So again, for anyone just tuning in, I'm just walking down Lake Street in South Minneapolis. This is the Hennepin County Library, East Lake branch. Boarded up the windows, removed a bunch of the graffiti. It's the pawn shop. So much graffiti. There was stuff written everywhere on like every surface, and it's pretty much either covered up or cleaned off, except for on the ground in a lot of the parking lots. That's all still there. So again, this was a big building, similar in size to this one. There was a restaurant, a couple restaurants, a check cashing place, a radio station, a venue, I think a couple of them. The place that George Floyd and Derek Chauvin both worked was in here. After it burned, a lot of the building did remain, some of the facade and a couple of big walls, but it's now been knocked down. Actually, I have so there's historic buildings in this neighborhood, and when they were getting preserved, there's a couple places in the Twin Cities like this where there's signage, so you can read about what the history of the building, when it was built, who built it. And I remember the day after the fire that destroyed this building, I was standing here, but it was a heap of bricks. And the bricks were like up to the sign, and I was trying to see if I could still read some of the information. And the bricks came out pretty far into the street. So for those not familiar with the area or who have just tuned in, this is Lake Street. I'm at Lake and 27th. The Minneapolis 3rd Precinct building is right over there. The AutoZone was right there. Next to this building is a smaller building that housed a delicious Indian restaurant called Gandhi Mahal. It was right here. I'm sure some of you heard about this place, even if you're not local and didn't get a chance to enjoy their delicious food. The owners are wonderful people who care a lot about the community, and said early on, before this place was affected and burned, that they released a statement saying that if their building had to burn, it had to burn. They were understanding of the uprising that was happening and the change that needed to be made. And this is also part of Gandhi Mahal, but a separate building. They had community space here that people from the community could use, rent out for various reasons. So this is the back of the liquor store. If you weren't watching earlier, I mentioned that there's a tobacco store here, and I don't remember what this was, but the night that the precinct was lit on fire and the liquor store burned, I didn't stay too late that night, but I was across the street over there when the tobacco store started burning. Just started with a little fire, and then something inside started exploding, so there were loud pops and bangs and people keeping their distance. There's the 3rd precinct again. Again, so much of the graffiti has been covered up. So this is the front. You can still see it says Minnehaha Liquors up there. The bigger sign from the roof ended up inside. My leg's okay right now. Thanks, Kathy. It actually feels a lot better when I'm using it. Hurts if I sit too long and then my knee stops working. AutoZone, Minnehaha Liquor Store, Precinct, Target. I'm on Lake Street right now. This is the intersection of Minnehaha. The next stoplight is Snelling. Right after that is the overpass for Hiawatha. One night, that's where there was a lot of tension with the National Guard happening there. The National Guard was set up kind of on the other side of Hiawatha and right by that overpass. Stuff happened there, here, kind of all over the place. And if you had caught my live streams as all of this stuff was happening, I tried to remind everybody that's not from here how widespread everything was. This is one area where stuff happened. This is the area where there was the biggest concentration of buildings that were destroyed. But way farther down Lake Street is where another police precinct is, where a Wells Fargo bank burned, a post office burned. There have been gas stations that burned kind of just like all over the Twin Cities. And then over in St. Paul, which is a city right next to Minneapolis. We have two cities right next to each other here. Some things burned, and there was tear gas and everything over there too. So this is not the only area where stuff happened. Yeah, after the first few nights when things burned, that really didn't last that long. There's still been a pretty consistent protest presence. The last couple days there hasn't been as much going on, but the momentum is still going. There's been massive peaceful marches multiple days in a row in downtown Minneapolis, keeping pressure on so the officers are held accountable, and keeping pressure on the city council, who has said that they've tweaked what they're saying a little bit, but they've said they want to defund, disband the police. So there's a lot of people that are keeping that momentum going, not being quiet. Again, in that parking lot over there by Target is a big Juneteenth event that's happening right now. I did live stream in there a little bit, but then I wanted to take a chance to show you guys what stuff looks like over here. So this was Wendy's. I have sort of a funny series of everything that happened to Wendy's. Like, for some reason, I just happened to take pictures at the beginning where there was nothing wrong with Wendy's. And then I took some pictures when there was just a broken window and a little bit of graffiti on Wendy's. And then the next day, AutoZone was on fire next to Wendy's, so there was all this smoke around it. And then the next day, it burned. And then it's kind of interesting to look at all of those photos back to back. So even on a building like this, that is absolutely destroyed, the graffiti has been covered up. There were very big black letters on that section of the building that remains. ACAB was on there. So somebody covered that up. Little spots over there covered up also. We decided. I'm gonna tell y'all something right now. Aldi was looted at the same time that Target was and Cub was. I know Target got most of the attention, but that Aldi did also. And then I think all of those other little stores right next to the Aldi were empty at the time. There were a lot of broken windows and stuff there, but I don't think anything was in there. This was the construction site. There was a big building that was under construction here. A lot of you have probably seen that crazy photo of the massive building that was on fire. That was this, multiple floors up. There was a bunch of construction material right here, and then the building was here, and it went up quite a few floors. The building burned after I went home, but when I was here one night, this area where they were kept all of the construction materials, a bunch of the stuff, like pieces of metal and large pieces of wood, were being pulled out and used to build a barricade on Minnehaha that was right here. There was a constant evolution of barricades being built and then being moved because the police would move in and overtake the spot that had the barricade, and then they would dismantle the barricade. So this was a huge barricade that was built over here with shopping carts, metal barricades, pieces of metal, and then tons of building materials from this construction site. And you can see the road is like dark right there because it got lit on fire. And then that building on the other side, there's a street on the other side of this construction, or this building that was under construction. And that building burned also.
One of the biggest police calls is domestic violence call. And
so there aren't any other areas in Minneapolis or St. Paul that have this many things that burned. This was the kind of what people referred to as ground zero. Right there is the Minneapolis 3rd Precinct building. That is where the officers worked that were involved. So the first day, George Floyd was murdered on a Monday. On Tuesday, there was a protest that started where he died at Cup Foods at 38th and Chicago. And then people marched from Cup Foods to in front of the precinct building here. And things escalated relatively quickly. Behind the building, some people had, at some point, vandalized some squad cars. I think for the most part, it was a peaceful gathering that was happening in front here. I was not here that day. I have friends that were here who said they've been to so many protests in the Twin Cities and across the country, and that was the first time they experienced the police responding to people with force without first giving a warning. So I wasn't there, but I've heard from multiple people that there was no dispersal warning given before the police began using tear gas. And then the next day, after that, people gathered throughout the day, but the crowds weren't super big until probably around 5 or 6 o'clock. And as the crowd grew, people were throwing rocks and water bottles at the precinct building. The police were responding with tear gas. That's when the barricade construction started happening, and as people got tear gassed and pushed back from the precinct, they filled this parking lot here to try to get away, and that's kind of what started the looting. People went into Target to try to get milk, water, supplies, to try to get away from the tear gas. Sounds like Target didn't let that happen. I didn't go for Target. I was with my friend Manar, and we went to that taller building back there, and we went into a tobacco store for fresh air, which was a little strange to go into a building for fresh air. They made us leave almost as soon as we got in. They asked us to leave, so then we went around the building and gathered ourselves and then headed back this way. And then we noticed on that walk that people had broken into the Target and Target was being looted. And then later that day is when the windows started getting broken here at the AutoZone, and then that night. So the Wednesday night is when the AutoZone burned. So that's what things look like right here in Minneapolis at Lake and Minnehaha. Like I said, there are places throughout the Twin Cities that have had a couple of buildings burned, but nothing to this scale. This is like what you would consider ground zero.
Ladies and gentlemen.
So thanks for watching. Thanks for sharing. I'm gonna probably head over to Cup Foods now, where George Floyd's memorial is. I haven't been there for a few days. So if you're interested in seeing what's happening there for Juneteenth, and I think there's a vigil happening there tonight, feel free to look for another live stream. Thanks everybody for watching. Happy Juneteenth. Stay safe. Bye.